Hey everyone, in this video, we're going to set up our login authentication. So what we're going to do is first we're going to create an actual login page we can access to log in. And then we're going to go ahead and install two packages, Axios and Cookie. And then we're going to go ahead and set up our auth context. So React has create context and use context. And we're going to use these two functions to create some state values and some functions that we can access globally across the entire application. So we'll save our user, we'll create like a login function to log someone in, and we'll save this in this context file so we can access it anywhere in our application. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is we want to go ahead and create our actual login page. So inside of pages, we'll create a new folder and we'll call this account. Inside of account here, we'll create a login.js file. So I'll save this as login.js. And so what we'll do is we'll go to the root of our project /account/login to see our login file. So first things first, I'll create a new functional component with React. I'll rename this to be login page. And for now, I'm going to get rid of this props value in the arguments. And I'm going to start with building the HTML or the JSX for this form. So what we'll do is first we'll bring in our layout and we'll wrap everything in our layout like usual. So I'll bring in my layout and I'll import that from import layout from components /layout. That's what it is. So it's up two folders, components /layout. Okay. And we'll change this tag here to layout as well. And now the first thing we'll do is we'll create a couple different divs. And I'll add some styles to these divs later, but for now I'm just going to create them. So we'll do a div. Actually, let's go ahead and just copy our index page. This will be much easier. We just copy this instead of starting from scratch. And I'll paste it all in here. We'll go ahead and comment out this for now. And we'll remove everything out of our arguments. And so this will give us our use style set up, everything imported, and everything kind of set up for us. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything inside this layout and start from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a div. And then I'm going to create another div inside of this div. This will be to add styles later on. Okay, and now inside this div, I'm going to add a typography component. So I'll do a typography component, a variant equaling h3. And we'll go ahead and put login as the text, and we'll close off this component. And below that, I'm going to go and create a card. And we'll add a card content inside of the card, like that. And now inside this card content, I'm going to go and create all of my fields. Or actually, let's go ahead and put our form and then create all of our fields inside of that. So we'll add a form tag. Let's go ahead and close off all these tags real quick as well. Card content and then card. Okay, and now inside of this form, we'll go ahead and create all of our fields. I'm going to wrap all of them in divs. So I'll create a div. And now inside of here, I'm going to add a text field, a label equaling username. We'll add full width as a prop. And we'll add some more things later, but for now, I'm going to go ahead and stop with just that. Then after we get this showing correctly, we'll go ahead and add some more stuff. Now let's go ahead and close off this div. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this down one more time for our password field. So I'll copy this, paste it right there. And on this field here, I'm going to change the name to password. And then since we want this to be the typical input type of password, so it doesn't actually show the plain text as we type it in, I'm going to go ahead and add something else here. Input props equals, and then two curly braces. Now inside of here, we can put whatever we want. So this could be any sort of input prop we want, a placeholder or anything. In our case, we want type. So do a type, and we'll set this to password. And that will make sure that it doesn't just show the plain text, but it shows the little black circles that you normally see when you type into a password field. And that is it for that field for now. So that is good. Let's go ahead now and create one more input here, and this will be a button. So what we'll do, I'm going to copy this, paste this, and we're going to go ahead and change this. So instead of it being a text field, we're going to have a button, and we'll add a variant equaling to contained. We'll get a color equaling primary. And for now, that's all we're going to put there. So I'm going to go ahead now and put login as the text and close off this button. Just like that. And finally, we want to have a page that goes to a register page. That doesn't exist yet, but we're going to go ahead and set it up now so it will exist. So it will work once we set up the other page. So I'll create another div here. Inside this div, I'll first create a link tag. So we'll bring that in with next/link if we haven't already, which we have not. So I'll need to bring that in right here. So I'll do import link from next/link. And this link will need an href. And for now, this doesn't exist, but it will when we create that form. So I'll just set it up now of account/register. Inside of this link tag here, I'm going to put an a tag. This will be to style it later on. So I'll create an a tag here. And I'll put the text being don't have an account register. Something along those lines should work. Or we'll put sign up. Like that. Okay, we'll save that. And that's really it for this page, probably. This import does not have everything we need. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that in from the repository. That's all available in the GitHub repository in the description if you want to get this, or you can just add them all yourself. You just need button, card content, make styles, text field, and typography. So I'll go ahead and save that. Let's go ahead and see how this looks now and see if we made any mistakes. So I will jump into... Actually, I forgot to rename this. We'll name this the login page. And we'll rename it here at the bottom as well, or we don't need to. Okay, so I think that might be it. Let's go ahead and try this out now. Okay, I have my server running, so let's go ahead and jump into our browser. Go to localhost 3000. And here is our local reviews site. Let's go to /account/login. And it looks like we're getting an error here. Can't resolve components layout. So I need to fix that import. So we'll go back to Sublime Text Editor. And there should be one more folder up. So it should be about that. Let's go ahead and try that out. There we go. So this has no styles at the moment. And this does not go to anything because we haven't made that link yet. But we have a username and a password field. And so this is all working correctly. Let's go ahead now and just make this look better. So we'll add some styles to this. So we're going to add some more styles to this make styles like we've been doing for the other videos in this tutorial. This root one can stay the exact same. But let's go ahead and delete this category card and add some new ones right here. So this will rename this to be form. And we'll add some styles here. First, we'll add a margin top, and we'll set this to be 35 pixels. We will go ahead and add some breakpoints. So we can do theme.breakpoints.down, sim, and then we can go ahead and add a width of 100% and a padding of 0 on top and bottom and 10 pixels left and right. I'll come back and explain this in a second, but let's go ahead and add our other breakpoint first. So I'll add a theme.breakpoints.up this time, and this will be MD. And this one we'll go ahead and put a width of 50%. We'll add a margin outside of our breakpoints of 0 and then auto to center this. And that should be it for this form class. So what we're doing here is we're adding some margin top on all screen sizes of 35 pixels. And then on smaller screens, on small screens and smaller, we want to go ahead and set the width to 100% and add a tiny bit of padding on the edges of the screen. And then on medium and up, we want to go and set the width to 50%. And we're doing this way. That way on small screens, the form is not only taking up half the screen. Since the screen is already so small, we want it to take up the entire width. But on these larger screens, it'll look better to have it only take up about 50% of the screen. And then this margin 0 auto will just center it on all screens, making it look just a little bit better. Okay, let's go ahead now and create a few more classes. Then we'll add all these classes to our JSX code. So next will be a title. And this will add a margin bottom on this one of 8px. We'll add an input class and a margin of 15px 0. We'll add a link container class, and this will add a margin of 15px 0. We will go ahead and add a link class as well, and this will have a color of, and I already got this color ahead of time, it's going to be 0645 AD. We can add a transition, and this transition will just smooth the change from the hover and the normal states. So the color changes won't be right away, but they'll take 0.3 seconds to make that change. It just makes it look a little smoother. And then we're going to add some hover effects to this. And the way we do this is to put a string and type and colon hover. And then we can put a colon, curly braces, and add all of our hover styles in here. So when we hover over this link, I want to go and change the color. So we'll change the color to be 3366 BB. And we also want to add a transition here as well of 0.3 seconds. So when we transition into this hover or out of this hover style, it will have a smooth transition of 0.3 seconds just to make it look a little smoother and not so dramatic and drastic. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and stop there for now. Let's go add these styles to our application or to our JSX. Let's go ahead and add these styles to our JSX now. So we'll come down here, and first I'll add a class to the root. So I already have this set up where we got our classes use styles already set up. So in case you didn't see the other videos, this use styles matches this function that we created here. Once we call this, we set it to a variable, and then we can access everything off of this. So we can do classes dot form, and will give us this form class, or classes dot root will give us this root class. So we can add our styles with our class name keyword like we normally would in React. So I'll go to this first div and I'll add a class name. This will equal classes, which is what we named our variable up above, dot root. And actually, this is the wrong spot. This should be not here, but this should be right up here. And then below that, we want to go ahead and add our form class. So we're going to put our form class on the next div. So right here, we'll add another class name equaling classes.form. On the typography, we want to add our title class. So we'll add a class name equaling to classes.title. And then on each of these input divs, we want to go ahead and add our input class. And the input class, all it has is some margin. So I'm going to add it to all of these, to the username, password, and also the button, just so they're not like against each other. Right now, when you look at this, they're all pressed against each other. So this will just alleviate that and give them a little more space. So put a class name equaling classes.input. I'm going to go and just copy this down on all of these. So one there and one there. Let's go ahead and save that and see what it looks like right now. And there we go. Okay, so it updated all of our styles here. We have our card. We have some space between our buttons here. Our text was a little different. What we do there? We added some margin on the top and bottom. So it gives a little space here and a little space there. And yeah, but now we need to go ahead and style this link, and we'll do that with those link classes. So I'll go ahead and on the div around my link right here, I'll add this link container, just add some space again. And then we'll add on the actual A tag, this link class to give it the hover effects and the new colors. So on this div right here, I'm going to go ahead and add a class name equaling classes dot link container. And then on this A tag right here, I'll add a class name equaling classes dot link. And now when we hover over this, you'll see it changes colors slightly, and it's kind of a smooth transition because of the transition we added of 0.03 seconds, of 0.3 seconds. But there we go. That's our login form. So that's great and all, but right now this is not doing anything. So let's go ahead and make it actually save these values somewhere. So right now this does nothing at all. It doesn't actually save it anywhere. So let's go ahead and use our set state hook to actually save these values. So like we've done before, what we'll do is we'll bring in use state. Oh, sorry, use state, not set state. But we should bring in use state from React. So we'll need to import that here at the top. We'll do import use state from React. And now we can save all of these values in the state. So first we'll go ahead and create two state values, one for the username and one for the password. So up here, I'll put at the very top, I'll go ahead and put const set, or do const username, set username equals use state, and the default will be an empty string. Then we'll do a const password, set password equals use state, and the default being an empty string. Now we want to add an onChange event onto each of these text fields, and that will allow us to get the value and save it every time we change something in the input. So every time we type something or delete something from the input, it will update the state value. So what we can do is do an onChange equals, and what we'll do here is take the E value that we get from the event, and we'll go ahead and call set username. In this case, let's run the username field, and this, what we'll set it to will be e.target.value, which will get us the value in this input field. The last thing we want to do here is get this value from usernames, whatever's saved right here, whatever's in this value, and default being this, but then once we update it, whatever's here, we want to go ahead and set as the value for this input. So very easily, we can do value equals username. Now we'll go ahead and copy this down for the next input for our password. So I'm going to go and just copy all of this. Come over here and paste it right there. Now, of course, we'll change set username to be set password. Then we'll change the value to be password as well. Now that I have these values saved, I need to go ahead and actually get them somehow. And the way I'll do this will be to add a submission, an onSubmit on our form. So I'll come up here and I'll add onSubmit equals, and then we'll put a function name in here. And in this case, I'm going to call it submit handler. So we'll type submit handler in curly braces. Then up here, I can go ahead and create that function. So I'll do const submit handler equals an arrow function like that. We're going to go and change this to have an E value passed in the event. And since we are since we only have one of these arguments in our function, we don't need parentheses. So I'll go ahead and delete the parentheses. And the first thing I want to do is prevent any default behavior. So by default, when you submit a form, it will refresh the page. We don't want that here. So I can type e.prevent default to stop that from happening. And then I'm going to go ahead and just console.log username and then console.log password. Make sure we have everything working correctly before we go any further. Come back here, open the terminal up, clear all that out, and I'm going to go ahead and type in test and hit login. And it doesn't look like it's submitting our form. Let's go ahead and double check that, see what might be going on. So it looks like I forgot to put a type of submit on our button. So for this to submit the form, we'll need to add type equaling submit. We'll save that. We'll come back here, refresh the page. And I'm going to go ahead and type that in again, test, and hit login. And there we go. So now if I put something else in here, it will log out correctly. So we're getting username and password. Okay, so that's all working great. So now we have a basic form set up and ready to handle any input. But what we need to do now is go ahead and set up our context and then our API function to actually log in the user. So once again, real quickly, what we'll do is inside of this function, where is it? Right here. Inside the submit handler function, we're going to go ahead and call a context function called login. That login function will have a API request to our API folder we have here. Right now we just have a hello route. We're going to go ahead and make a new one here called login. And this will actually log in the user and handle all that logic to save the tokens and everything else. So before we can go any further, we need to go ahead and set up our context for this. And we're going to use React's use context hook. And I'm going to go through a step-by-step. This is a little more confusing, but hopefully it'll make more sense once I set this all up and walk through the whole thing. So what we're going to do is create in the root of our front end here a new folder. I'm going to go ahead and call this folder context. Inside this context folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, save it as Authentication Contacts.js. Now we need to go ahead and set up the React context. So first things first, we need to go ahead and import create context and use state. So import create context and use state from React. And then I'm going to go ahead and import Axios because we'll need to make API requests with this. So we'll import Axios from Axios. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and import user router. After we successfully log in the user, we want to go ahead and redirect them somewhere. And so we'll use the next router for that to make that happen. Okay. Now the next two steps will be to set up our context using create context, which is this function we imported from React. And I'll put a link to the context documentation if you want to read up more on this. But what this will allow us to do is set some global functions and global state values in here that we can access anywhere in our application. So that's all we're really doing here is we're going to create a user, an access token, and an error state value, and then a login, register, logout, and all those functions as global functions we can call anywhere. And so what we can do then is we can access our user anywhere in our application from what we set up in this file. So hopefully that makes sense. But first things first, we need to create our context. So I'll create a variable and I'll name it Authentication Context. This will equal create context. Now we'll export a function called Authentication Provider. And this is where we're going to put all of our functions and state values in. I also want to give it a prop of children because we'll wrap this around all the rest of our application. So we need to get the children value to be able to show the rest of our application as well. Okay. And now we'll go ahead and create a function here Now let's go ahead and create a couple state values. So we'll create the ones I just talked about. So we'll create a user state value, set user. This will equal use state, default being null. Then we're gonna go ahead and I'll just go ahead and just copy this down 2 more times. And the next one will be access token. This will be set access token. Finally, you want to have an error, so if something went wrong, we'll set an error in here so we can display it in our form. And we'll handle showing that later. But for now, I just want to get this part set up. Okay, now let's go ahead and set up our router as well. So later we can use this. This won't be used for a little while, but we'll just set it up now. And now we want to go ahead and create a few functions. For now, I'm going to focus just on logging in the user. And I'll come back and I'll add more later. So let's go and create a function called login. And this will be an async function. And we want to pass in an object that contains the username and the password. So we'll destructure that object right here. And then we'll go ahead and create a function right here. For now, I'm going to go into just console.log username and password, just so we know it's working. I also want to go ahead and console log something else. So we'll do console log. I'll just do login context. That way we know it's being called from this file right here and this function right here. Okay, now let's go ahead and set up the context to be able to use these things. So what we'll need to do is return something at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and return, add some parentheses. And what we want to return is our context and then our children inside of the context. So what we'll do here is we'll use our authentication contacts dot provider, and we'll set a value, and this value will hold everything we want to go ahead and allow the application to have access to. So it will be each of these state values and any function we create down here. So let's go and start passing those in. So do user access token error. Let's go and pass in our login function as well. We'll close off that tag right there, and we'll close off the tag right here as well. Just like that. And then we'll go ahead and pass in the children inside of here. So we'll go ahead and put curly braces and then children. There we go. We'll save that. And now finally, at the very bottom of this file, we want to go and export default our authentication context. So export default authentication context. So this setup didn't make a whole lot of sense. A lot of this stuff here, like this, it's things you'll do every single time. So don't worry too much about that. To set up the context, we just need to have this and all of this. The main thing you should focus on here is understanding what's happening inside this authentication provider function, which is where we're creating global state values and global functions to access anywhere else in our application. So what we want to do now is call this login function inside of our form whenever we submit the form. But right now we can't do that because we don't have access to these values and these functions that we passed in down here yet. What we'll need to do to get access to that is update our underscore app.js. So we'll go to pages underscore app.js. We'll need to make some changes here. So what we'll do is bring in our authentication provider first. So we'll import that. So we'll do import. And this is not a default export, so we need to put it inside curly braces. We'll do authentication provider from / context. Be one more maybe, context. It should just be one, I think. Yeah, it should be context / authentication context. And then down here where we're returning this component with the page props, we want to go ahead and wrap this with our context. And so then everything that's wrapped around, which is our entire application, will have access to our state values. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and put a parenthesis there, put that on a new line, and then put a closing parenthesis below that right down there. And now instead of here, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this with the authentication provider that we just brought in. So we wrap that. And we wrap that and close it off down here. just like that. Let's go ahead and save that real quick and make sure there's no errors. So check here, should be good. Let's go ahead and reload this page. Okay, so far so good. So a lot of this might not make a whole lot of sense if it's new to you, but that's just kind of basic setup for the context. We need to do all that setup in this file, and then we need to wrap it around what we're returning in our underscore at.js. And that's just something you'll need to do every single time to set this up. Okay, let's go ahead now and try calling this login function from our login.js. So instead of just logging out the username and password here, let's go ahead and call login, and we'll pass in our username and our password. Now, we'll need to bring this in. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and from React, we'll import use context. So we use create context to create our context right here. And then to use it, we can use context, which also imports from React. And so what we'll do is we'll come down, right down here, I guess, and we'll do a const, and we'll destructure login from use context, and we need to pass in our context. We need to pass in authentication context, which we need to bring in as well. So up here, I'm going to go ahead and import authentication context from like that, save that, and now let's go ahead and try running this and see what happens. So we'll go ahead and type in test and ABC and hit login. And there we go. So now we're logging login context and username test and password ABC. And you can see we're logging it from our authentication context.js. So now we're correctly set up where we can call anything passed in down here to any of our other pages. So all this data right here is now accessible anywhere in our application. So now with that set up, we can go ahead and handle all the logic to actually log in the user. So obviously we need to make some changes here to this function, but I'm not going to start here. I'm going to start with our API call because we're going to need to build that before we can call it instead of here. So what we'll do is instead of here, we're calling this context function, and inside this context function, we're going to call an API function that we're going to create now. So what we'll do is we should already have an API folder, and there's probably just a hello.js right now inside of there. I'm going to delete everything in that file and then rename this to login.js. And inside of here, we can go ahead and create a new function. So we'll do export default async request and response, and this will be an arrow function. And now we put all of our logic inside of here to actually log in the user. We'll need to import two different packages here. First one being Axios to make any API requests. So from Axios. We also want to import cookie, which I don't think we've installed yet. So let's go ahead and do that now. And what cookie will do is it will allow us to save a cookie. In this case, it will be an HTTP only cookie using set cookie as a header. And we'll get into how to do that here in a second, but let's go ahead and just install this right now. So I'm opening up my terminal to my front end, make sure you're in your front end, and run npm I cookie. Now we'll install it. And inside your package.json, you should see cookie right here. Okay, so now we should be ready to go with that. Let's go ahead and make sure we rerun our server. So, oops, don't want to do that. Let's go ahead and npm run dev again, and we'll come back to the code here and back to our login API that we just set up. And we're gonna go and do a few things here. First, let's go ahead and create a variable and call it access token. This is where we'll save our access token once we get that. Next, we want to make sure that we're sending a post request. That's the only request we want to be allowed. So we'll do if request.method. So on this request in the parameters, we have a method on that, and we can check, make sure that's equal to post. If it is, we'll run the logic. Else, we want to go and throw an error. So we'll go ahead and do res.setHeader allow, and then we'll put a list of all the methods we're allowing. In this case, it's only post. Okay, next we'll do a res.status, and inside of here we'll do 405, and we'll do .json, and then we'll go ahead and pass in an error message. And all of our messages and error messages will be put in the same format where we have message, colon, and then some error message. In this case, I want to go ahead and just put method and then get the method. So I'm putting backticks, and I can do a $sign and two curly braces to pass in a variable. We'll do request.method. So whatever they tried to use is not allowed. So we'll do that method is not allowed. And so we'll go ahead and keep the same format of message and then a string on all of our error messages. That way we can display it consistently in our front end. Okay, now we have that check out of the way. Let's go ahead and start building in the logic. So the first thing you want to do is we want to go ahead and get the username and password from the request.body. This will be a post request, and in the body of the request, we'll have the username and the password that they tried submitting to log in. So first we'll get those two values. So we'll do a const, and we'll destructure username and password from the request.body. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up our headers and our body for our request. So we need to make a few requests. The first one being to the API token route. So in the last few videos, we create a route to create and return a token. It will actually return two tokens, an access token and a refresh token. And so first you want to go ahead and take this username and password and make that request to get those tokens. So what we'll do here is we'll do a const data equals await Axios dot post, make a post request to http local host port 8000 /API /token, which is that route we created earlier. We need to pass in a body and a config into this function. So we'll go ahead and set that up above it. So first we'll create our config, and this will be our headers. So we'll do config equals an object with a key of headers, which will be another object. Now instead of here, we can set all of our headers. So first we'll do accept, and this will be set to application /JSON. And then we also want a content type. And this will be application /JSON as well. Next, we'll need our body. So this will have the request body. So we'll do a const body equaling an object, and this will just have username and password, which is what we need to pass into the body of this API token request to actually get the token back. Now, let's go ahead now and just log out this token right here. So let's do a console.log, and we'll log out that data, which will return those two tokens. Let's go ahead now and call this function instead of our context. So now instead of console logging this, we're going to console log whatever in our login. So what we'll do here is we'll make a Axios request here as well. We'll do a const and we'll destructure data from that. And whenever you make an Axios request, you'll go ahead and just destructure data to get whatever response you want from the request. So that's just what you need to do for that. But we'll go ahead and await Axios.post, because we need to make sure this is a post request. We want to go to http:/localhost port 3000. Make sure this is 3000, not 8000, because this request is coming from this API folder, which is still in our front end on our dev server. So it's localhost 3000 instead of 8000. Then once again, we want to pass in a config and a body to this request. Or sorry, a body and then config. Body and then config. So above this request right here, I'm going to go ahead and create a config, just like we did before, of headers. And this will have accept application /JSON, and then also want content type, and this will be application /JSON as well. And then we'll go ahead and create a body, const body equals, once again, username and password. So this is just the same as before. We just need to pass that same data into this request right here. And I actually forgot to put /API/login at the end of that. So make sure your full string for the request is localhost 3000 /API/login. Okay, now with that done, we can go ahead and see what we get from that. So I'm gonna go ahead and save that and try logging in. And it looks like we're getting an error. Let's take a look at what that error might be. We go to our console, we should see something there. Okay, so we're getting an error saying no active account with the given credentials. Let's go ahead and pass in some correct credentials and see what we get. So I'll come back here. I'm going to refresh this page, and we'll handle this error later. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm going to go and type in my admin account I created and hit login. And look in our console here, and you'll see right here, we have our access and our refresh token coming back. So that's working correctly. And we've correctly called from our context login function, we've called this new function inside of our login.js within our API folder. So this is all working correctly, and we're getting our data from our API token from our backend. Let's go ahead and keep going with this and get the actual user now. So we have these tokens, but we don't have a route for this at the moment. So I'm going to go and write this all out, but it won't work yet until we create that route, but I'll do that here in a second. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go and get rid of this console.log. The first thing we want to do is we want to set an access token. So we have the token here in this data, and we can access that from, if you look at our console here, data dot one of these things. In this case, the first one we want to access is this access token. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'll rename this. This is just not very specific. So you can rename anything that's destructured by putting the name, the original name of it, and then a colon, and then a new name for it. So I'm going to go and rename this to be access response. So now it's called access response instead of data. But what I want to do is set this access token variable up here. So I'm going to go and do access token equals access response dot access, and that should get us this token right here. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and check for that token, and if it exists, we'll go ahead and call an API route that we haven't made yet, but we'll make here in a second. So first I'll do if access token. Then we're going to go ahead and create another config for this response. So we'll do a const user config equals, and this will have headers once again. And what we want to pass into this route will be an authorization header. And then the value will be bearer space plus our access token. And this will be what we set up in our backend here in a moment. But I'm going to go and just type it all here while we're in the front end. I'm going to go and just finish this part out. So then below that, we'll make the actual API request. We'll do a const. And once again, we'll destructured data. I'm going to rename that to be user data. This will equal await Axios.get. This will be a GET request. And it'll be to http://localhost port 8000 /API/user, and we'll pass in our user config. And then at the end of all this, we'll go ahead and just return a status. We'll do a res.status 200.json, and we'll pass in a response of user, and this we set to user data. We also want to return our access token, so we'll set access to be access token. And this is what we're setting to our front end. So everything goes well. We want to send back our user data and our access token. And if you can guess, what we're going to do with that is save it inside of our user and save it inside of our access token. So that's all we're going to do there. Okay, and that's all we need for a successful response. Let's go ahead and build this API request right now. So we go into our backend, into our reviews, and we'll go to this views.py folder. where we have all of our view sets, we're going to go ahead and create a new view. And this will be very simple to create, so it's not going to take very long. Create a new class, and we'll call this User API View. But instead of using a view set like before, we're going to use a RetriveAPI View class to inherit from. And if we jump into the docs, and we look at our API guide and go to views right here, and we'll come down to, actually no, it's in generic views. We come down to RetriveAPI View. Used for read-only inputs, represent a single model instance, provides a get method handler. So what we can see here is what it does is it retrieves something for read-only and provides a get method handler, so it should work with get requests, which is exactly what we need for our request. If we look at that request, what we're doing here is we're making a get request to this route to retrieve a user. So that's doing everything we need. So that's doing everything we need inside of this RetriveAPI generic view. Okay, so now we have that. We need to go ahead and import it. So up at the top of our views, below the view sets, I'm going to go ahead and import from REST framework.generics, import RetriveAPI View. Now inside this view, what we want to do is first set the permission classes in the serializer class. We want this only to be available if the user is logged in, because we can't get the user if they're not logged in. So first we'll set permission classes to be equal to a list of permissions dot is authenticated, which will force them to be logged in to be able to use this. Next, we'll set a serializer class, and since we're returning a user object, we want to use our user serializer. Now, next what we can do is we can override this def get object function, and what this will do will determine what is returned from this request. So in this case, since we know we're logged in, since we set this is authenticated up here, what we can grab is we can go ahead and return our self.request.user. When we log in, on the request object that Django creates, we'll have a user object, and that holds all of our user data. So what we can do is just authenticate the user through the token and then return that logged in user in this API request. And that's all that API view needs to do. So it's very simple. What we need to do now is add this to our urls.py so we can actually use it and make a request to it. So we'll add this to our backend and urls.py. But we need to make sure this route matches exactly what we put inside of our login API request. So you look at this one down here. What we did was went to localhost 8000/API/user. So our route needs to match this exactly. And also I'm going to go and put a trailing slash there as well. But we need to make sure we match this exactly. So what I'm going to do is back in my urls.py. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add another path in our URL patterns. Since this is not a view set, we can't use all of this. We got to go ahead and write it manually down here. So what we'll do is we'll do a path, and we'll pass an API/user, which is exactly what we put inside of here, API/user. And on this URL route, we want to go ahead and use the views.user.API view, which is what we named our API view in the previous file. And then we're going to go ahead and put as_view right there, because since it's a class-based view, we'll give it a name equaling to, we'll call it login. It doesn't really matter, but we'll go ahead and get that there. And so this user API view matches exactly what we typed in right here. So we're getting this view, and we're setting it to this API/user path. Okay, now let's go ahead and just console log that. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to my login API, and right here, this user data, let's go ahead and just console log that user data. Console.log user data. Now everything's working correctly. We should get our user data back from this request. So then we'll go ahead and jump into the browser again. And we'll type in our valid login credentials, admin, and we'll type in my password and hit login. and it looks like we're getting an error somewhere. Oh, I put const twice somewhere. Let's go and fix that. Looks like on user config, I put that twice for some reason. Probably caught that. Make sure we get rid of that and try this again. And another typo on my JSON response here. I put 2 curly braces. There should be 1 curly brace and then one parenthesis and 1 curly brace inside of that. Okay, let's try this again. And hit login. Okay, looks like we're getting an error. Let's go ahead and double check that. We'll look in our console, see what the error is. And it is... Okay, so we look in our API console. Looks like I put view instead of views. I did. I forgot to put... I put view, not views. Let's go and fix that and try this again. We'll log in and we'll check the terminal. And there we go. So there is our URL, our username. We don't have an email or any groups on this user, but we're getting our URL being the user ID inside of there and the username. Okay, there we go. Now we have it working. Sorry for those typos. Just had a few typos had to work through, but other than that though, we have this working fine. So now we're correctly getting this user, but there's still one major problem. If I were to type in the wrong credentials here and hit login, it's just going to fail and throw this bad error. We don't really want this to happen. We want to handle this somehow. So let's go and update our API call to handle this. So what we'll do is we'll log in, we'll jump into our login.js file again, and we'll add some things here. What we'll do here is first, we'll handle our first request here. So this API token. This is the one that would fail if any of them. Once we have a valid token, it shouldn't fail. So what we'll do is we'll wrap this request here in a try catch. So above this, I'll type try, and we'll grab both this access token variable and our actual Axios request, and we'll put it inside of that try. And then we'll add a catch. So if this fails for whatever reason, we'll add some error messages here to handle that. And if you were just to Google Axios handle errors, you'll get something in the Axios docs telling you exactly how to handle it. So this is what we're going to do. But since we're using an async await instead of doing .get, .catch, etc., what we'll do instead is wrap it in a try catch. But we're going to use these same errors right here. So I'm actually going to go and just copy this. This will be in the link. This link will be in the description below, or you can just Google Axios handle errors. You'll get it either way. But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and handle errors the exact way it has it in the docs. So I'll paste this here, then I'll go ahead and walk through it. So what we're doing here, let's fix our indents first, actually. Okay, so what we're going to do here is first, if there's an error, check if there's an error.response. If this happens, we know the request was made and there was some error status code. And in our case, this will probably be from them entering the wrong credentials, putting a wrong password or wrong username in. If there's a request made, but there's no response was received, then we know we have a request, we don't have a response. Then we'll go ahead and just console log the request to see what went wrong. And if something else happened, we'll just log error and then log the error message. I'm going to go ahead and change all these logs though to error, so it shows up in red in our console, just so we know it's an error and not some debug thing. And then I also want to go ahead and return a response after each of these. So if we have this first one where we have a wrong response, I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's because they put the wrong credentials in. So what I'm going to do is return a res.status 401.json, and then I'm going to pass in a message. Keep the sort of thing the same as before, the structure. So we have a message, an object with a key of message, and then the error message. And we can get the error message by typing error.response.data.detail. If one of these other ones here fail, we're going to go ahead and throw a 500 error. So I'll change this to error as well. But then below this, I'm going to go ahead and return an error. So I'll go ahead and return. Actually, we'll put outside of this else. We don't want it inside the else. Yeah, so just the bottom of the catch. We'll go ahead and return res.status, and this will be a 500 error. And we'll go ahead and do a JSON, and we'll do an object with a key of message once again, and then the error message will just be something went wrong. And that should handle an error message now. So I went into here and I refreshed this page and I typed in something that's completely wrong and hit login. It now throws a 401 error, and we'll handle this in our front end and actually display it here later. But we have our error being thrown correctly, being a 401 if the information they put in is wrong. Okay, so now we look at what we did. We now have a function that returns both a refresh and an access token. We're taking that access token, we're getting the user down here, doing this API request we just made, and then returning that user and that access token to the front end. Now there's one more thing we're not doing that we need to do, and that is saving our refresh token somewhere. So if we looked above here, way up here to where we had our tokens, right here, we did something with this access token, but we did nothing with this refresh token. And that is where this cookie library comes in. So what we're going to do, if I go into the docs here and I take a look at the cookie library, so I did cookie GitHub, I think will take me there, and click on this first one, I think. Yes, so the one here with npm install cookie, you can see how we can use this. We can parse the cookie, which we'll do later, and that is to return the name value pairs from the cookie. But right now what we want to do is serialize a cookie. So we want to go ahead and serialize it into a name value pair into a set cookie header string. And there's all these different options we'll pass in. But we need to make sure we set this header to save this cookie. So down here in this example, you'll see how we're going to do this. We'll do res.setHeader. We'll set the header to be set cookie, and then we'll create the cookie with cookie.serialize. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what we're going to do is up here. So up here, we set the access token here, and right below this, we want to go ahead and set the refresh token inside of an HTTP only cookie. So what we'll do is we'll do a res.setHeader, just like that example, set-cookie, and we'll do cookie.serialize. And we want to name this cookie, so we'll give it a name. In this case, we refresh for our refresh token. And then we can get our refresh token, just like we got our access token with access response.access. We'll get the refresh with access response.refresh. And then we'll pass in our options inside of an object right here. And there's going to be a bunch of them. First one will be HTTP only. And in this case, we want that to be true. Next, we'll have a secure of false. And in production, I'm going to change this to true. This is to make it be sent over to HTTPS. So I'm going to go ahead and do in production, change secure to true, just to remember to do that. But for testing right now, we'll set that to false. Next, we'll set a max age, and this will be the default age for refresh tokens in Django, which is 24 hours. So we can get that with 60 times 60 times 24, and that will be 24 hours. Next, we'll set a path, and we'll set the path just to be the root, as we want this accessible everywhere. Okay? And now, oh, actually, there's one more we want to add, which is same site. So same site, and this we set to strict. That's what I'm going to set it to, strict. This will make it have to be on the same origin, otherwise it'll throw an error. Okay, now with that done, we should have our cookie set. We've checked for errors and we've handled getting any errors. We've got our access token in our user and return that to our front end. So now we need to handle getting that user and access token in here. So we can receive that access token down here. So I were to go ahead and do a console.log data, we can see what we're returning. So I'll come back here, come back to our front end here, and I'll type in my admin user again. So we're getting error with our cookie now. Let's double check that real quick, see what we did wrong there. So up here with our set cookie.serialize, refresh. Oh, I forgot a comma after same site over here. Just forgot that comma. Let's go ahead and put that comma there. Make sure we have it everywhere else. I think so. Let's go ahead and try this again. And this error over here, I keep closing it out. It's just because our href does not match anything. That's because we haven't created that page yet. It doesn't really matter right now. But I'll go ahead and put my credentials in here and hit login. And there we go. So now you'll see what we're returning. We're getting our access token and we're getting a user object with our user details. So now we can take each of these, the access and the user, and we can go ahead and save that in a use state value so we can access it anywhere else in our application. So back in our authentication context, let's go ahead and handle this. So first things first, we want to check if there's an access response, and then if there is an access response.user. So instead of console logging this, so first we want to check that if inside this data, if we have any sort of data, and then if we have that data.user and .access. I'm gonna go ahead and rename data to access response just to make it more clear what it is. So it's just the access response to get the access token and the user. So first we'll check, is there an access response? So if access response and if access response dot user. So we have a user object in that response. Let's go ahead and set user and then pass in the access response dot user. Then we'll check if there's an access response and there's an access response dot access. So we have an access token. Let's go ahead and set that as well. So I'll go ahead and do set access token. This will be access response dot access. And then if everything goes okay, we'll go ahead and do a router.push, and I'll push back to the home page. So we'll just redirect them to the home page if everything went okay. Now, if for a correct response, that's all we should need. Let's go ahead and test that out real quick. So I'll go ahead here and type my correct login. And there we go. So I went ahead and redirected us back to the home page. Let's go ahead and come back here, refresh the page. But if I were to type in wrong information, you'll still see that it fails like this. Let's go ahead and change that now. So what we can do is we can wrap this response in a try catch like we did before. So I'll do a try, then add a catch, pass an error, just like that. And then we'll grab all of this data right here, cut all of this out, and put it inside the try. Let's go ahead and fix the indents. Like that. Okay. And then inside of our catch, once again, I'm going to go in and copy all of this because we're going to do most of this the same. We'll change some things, but the way we handled errors before, we're going to handle it the same way because we're still in the Axios request. We want to follow their guidelines again for that. So I'm going to go ahead and just put all of this. Looks like it needs to go in one more. And now instead of logging all this to console and returning a response, we don't want any of that anymore. So I'm going to clear out all of this on all of these. And instead of doing that, what we want to do is set the error state object. So, and up here on this first one, we're going to go ahead and call set error, and we'll pass in error.response.data.message. And I'm also going to check for if there is, just to be safe, error.response.data. So what we'll get here is we'll get a data with our message object inside of it, or a data object with our message key and value inside of it. That'll be the same thing we set up down here, where we put an object of message and then some string. We want to set the error to be that string. That's all we're doing here. I'm going to go ahead and do that for each of these. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down here and here. And what we'll do here is change this one here to be something went wrong, and the other one to be something went wrong as well. So if something else happened, it wasn't the wrong credentials, there's some other error we got to deal with. So I'm going to go ahead and just log that out down here. And then down here as well, we'll change this console.error to be error, error, and then we'll do error.message, and we'll set the error to be something went wrong once again. And then just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and return after each of these. So I'll add just a return statement to make sure nothing else is ran, and it just stops it right here. So I'll do return, and if it goes all the way out here at the bottom, which it shouldn't, but we'll just to be safe, we'll add a return here as well. Okay. And I think that should be it. Now when we go ahead and fail and type the wrong information in, and now it just has a 401 showing up over here, but it's not failing our whole application. So now we can take that error message and display it on this page somewhere. But we're not going to do that right now. We'll get to that later. This video is already getting pretty long, so I'm probably going to go ahead and stop here. There's one more thing I'm going to add, which is a sign in or sign out button in the nav bar. And then we're going to go ahead and check if there's a user. If there is, we're going to change the text. So by default, it's going to be sign in. And if we find a user in our state, so if we find a user inside of our context, so we'll have this user accessible everywhere. So if there's something here that's not null, that means we logged in someone already. So you want to go ahead and find that. If that exists, then we'll change the text to be sign out. So let's go ahead and make that change real quick. And then I'm going to stop this video after that. So let's go ahead and jump into our components, into our nav bar. And here we should be able to add something here. So what I'm going to do is we first need to import that and bring it in. So we go to our login account page. We did something similar here. First, we'll go and copy this line, this const login, use context, and we'll come to our nav bar and we'll paste that right down here, I guess should work. And we'll change this to be user. We want to see if there's a user or not. So we want to grab the user state value instead of the login function. And then we need to go ahead and grab our imports as well. So we'll go ahead and grab from our login account up here at the top, we imported Authentication Contacts and then use context from React. So I'm going to go at first import and copy this import of Authentication Context and paste that in up here. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring in use context from React at the top here. Okay, and now we should be able to see if there's a user. So now what we'll do is we'll come down into our JSX here. And then inside of this list icon item here, let's go ahead and create another list item. And I'll use a different icon this time. But before I do that, let's set the logic up. So what we can do here is put curly braces and type user ? And then some parentheses. Make sure it's a parentheses and not curly braces, otherwise you'll have some issues. And what we can do here is say, if there's a user, run this. If not, run whatever's after that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it right here, and then paste it right here as well. And I go in to delete this bottom one right down here. So what we'll do is first fix these imports, or fix these indents. Bring that here, bring this one way in here, and bring this all in one more time. Okay, so what we'll do is if there's a user, we'll go to sign out, which doesn't exist yet, but we'll make that page later. So for now, we'll have it go there, and we'll change this text to be sign out. If they're not logged in, we're gonna go ahead and take them to login. Actually, we'll rename this page log out just to keep it consistent. And if they're not logged in, there's no user available, then we'll go to the login page and we'll change this text to be sign in. Let's go ahead and change these icons as well. And looking at the documentation, I'll probably grab, I guess this account circle will be fine. Let's go ahead and copy this. And we'll go ahead and paste that in both of these spots right here. So I'll paste that there, or actually no, sorry, this needs to go as an import. So we'll come up here and we'll paste this account circle, and then we'll use that down here on both of these. So we'll be account circle and then account circle. Okay, we'll save that, come back to our application, and you'll see here we're getting an error from Authentication Contacts. That's because since we're not as deep into our pages folder like we were before, and we're in this component, I forgot to change the input or the import to match where we're at. So we don't need one of those dot slashes. And it says the account circle is not defined. That's because it's account circle icon. I forgot to put the icon at the end. So I'll add icon right there and icon right here. We'll save that. There we go. Now we look inside of here. We have a sign in right now. We were to go log in. So we'll type in admin, and then we'll type in our password. Hit log in. It now says sign out, and it redirects us back to the home page. So we know this is all working. We're saving our user in our state, and then we updated our nav here to have a sign out option. If we refresh the page, you'll see it goes back to sign in. So right now we're not persisting the user. We haven't set that up yet, and we'll get to that in a little bit. This was a very long video, and it was a little bit complicated, but now we have our context set up, so now we can easily add register and log out and these other functions for our user authentication. That's where we'll stop here today. And now we have a login function working, and we can easily log in a user. In the next few videos, we'll add a register, our log out, and our persisting users and everything else we need for our user auth. So all the code will be in the description below, as well as links to all the docs we looked at and everything else. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.